Welcome to Jewish Boy Calls His Mother. I'm your host, Sadia, and this is my mother, Ima. Hey, Ma.
Hello, my little sweetness. And Kat, get your ass out of my face again. Gosh.
All right.
Every time I try to get on this podcast, for some reason, the cat just likes to show her tush.
She loves you.
Maybe that's how she feels about the world. She's trying to send us a subliminal message.
Maybe. Well, I guess we'll never know. But the topic I wanted to talk about was, were you growing up not religious, then becoming religious, and then becoming Lubavitch, and then focusing on, I guess heterim, so to speak? Like, you always wanted to take the hard way. You wanted to suffer in your Judaism. And I was hoping you can go ahead and explain that in regards to like how you accepted, rules and regulations, and you felt that like you were doing things like the Marines, where it's like, pain is weakness leaving the body. So the more you suffer, the better your life is going to be, so to speak. Not to put you in the hot seat, but basically that's what you told me growing up.
First of all, that premise about suffering is totally not true. I never felt that I actually suffered.
Okay.
I mean, I felt it, I guess I don't feel that I suffered from Judaism. Like that Reformed cantor said to the class. He says, what some people might look at as restrictions, other people find spiritually fulfilling. I never really suffered. It was, I would say, perhaps, it's how can I say it? It's a, not exchange. I'm looking for a better word than exchange.
It's more disciplined, I guess.
It's a
toughening out, maybe?
No, you can't have everything in life.
Yeah.
And I think that Kat,
yeah, it's fine.
She's trying to compete with payback scammer Pierogi with his gorgeous Persian cat that's been on his podcast a few times.
So back on topic.
Okay. So it's not like, okay, we can't have everything in life.
Yeah.
And we have to make a choice. And I never felt that I was suffering. I felt that what I was giving up was more than worth what I was getting back.
Okay.
I
mean, you mentioned giving up as like something, again, like it sounds like a sacrifice.
It's not. Yeah, but
if you weren't giving it up, then you realize it just wasn't necessary. Maybe you're removing like the excess that you really didn't realize you didn't really need. Maybe similar to like people going up to like, I guess, Halavai Buddhist retreats where they go up for a week or two and then meditate and they just get rid of everything and they sell everything and they just only have like the clothes on them and that feels kind of freeing. So in a sense, the religiosity of Chabad kind of felt more freeing and not necessarily restrictive.
In a way, but not to that extreme. I mean, as Jews, we do not, of course, embrace a monastic life. We do not believe in living in poverty. Although if you find yourself in a situation where, despite your best efforts, you are in poverty. In Judaism, there's an idea that not to feel that your suffering is for nothing. That there are certain things spiritually and mentally that, as a human being, that you will gain from going through a tough experience. And there is, one of the things, for most of my life, I can't say I lived in, horrible, abject poverty. Thank God I was, never on the street or anything like that. But, I've lived a life basically where there were times that I had to really watch my spending more than Other times, there were times there were times that financially were very, very tough. But what it taught me was it gave me a certain, it did pass, once I did get out of that situation, it gave me an appreciation and for the good things. It gave me an appreciation, for once I got out of it, for, being in a more comfortable situation. I appreciated it a lot more. And I was much more grateful to God for it than I would have been perhaps otherwise. I'm trying to think now. And it also gave me more of an empathy for when I heard about other people going through similar situations. I was more apt to help them because I knew what it was like to do without.
Okay.
Also, it also put me in a position where I was actually able to advise others who were going through the same thing. When your father was unemployed,
Yeah.
it was a tough time. I mean, thank God we worked together, we made ends meet. What was tough about it was not knowing from day to day if he was going to have a job or not. I'm not being able to make plans because maybe we'll make plans and then he'll get a call from one of the agencies he was dealing with, either to go for a job interview, or maybe he did a number of jobs for photocopiers at the time and for OU laboratories. We didn't know about that, and we found out about that after he lost his job, that these things were available and that they really liked calling him because they liked having somebody more in the southern part of the country rather than having to send people out from New York to have to drive a long distance and stay overnight or a couple nights away from their families. He at least was able to drive to these other areas since we were, more situated in the South in Maryland. But there was a woman who I came across who was in my carpool, and she calls me up, and the poor woman did not sound well. She goes, "I'm sick. I am so depressed. I don't know what to do." So what happened? Her husband, for a number of years, over 25 years, worked as a top engineer for this particular company. The company went totally down the tubes, like almost overnight. Filed for bankruptcy, fired everybody, laid off everyone. And this was a woman who never knew what it was like to do without. Never. Came from a upper middle class family. Never had to worry about finances at all. And suddenly she finds herself plunged into a situation where she suddenly has to really watch herself, watch her spending, worry about, how they're going to pay rent, how they're going to pay this, how they're going to pay that. And so she said, "I'm so sick, I'm so depressed, I don't know what to do." So I said to her, "Listen, let me give you some advice." I said, "I've been there, done that." I said, "Stop with the depression. Just stop it." I said, "Because if you become so depressed and mentally ill that you have to wind up being maybe institutionalized, or you wind up in a total catatonic state where you're not going to be there for your kids or your husband, what good that's going to do?" I said, "Because then, in addition to financial problems, now you've got marital and emotional problems. So do yourself a favor. When you have financial problems, keep them financial. Don't let it upset you. Don't let it get you sick. Just keep it financial. It's money." I said, "Tell me, do you have a degree? Do you have any training?" She said, "As a matter of fact," she said, "she does have a degree in psychology and counseling." And she says, "But she never really used it." I said, "Aha." I said, "Go to all the public school systems, apply for being a guidance counselor."
Hmm.
I said, "Does your husband have any other talents besides being an engineer?" She says, "He loves construction and building. In fact," she said, "he repairs everything in the house. Any time they ever needed anything done in the house, any construction, any repairs, he did it. It's like his hobby. He loves it." I said, "Fine." I said, "Now this time was on Federal Hill in downtown Baltimore. At that time, they wanted to renovate the neighborhood. They wanted to gentrify the neighborhood. they had all these old houses on sale for only $1.
Oh wow.
And at that time, this is during like the 1980s. I said you could buy as many houses you wanted, but you had to make the agreement you were going to renovate them. So she says, she goes, that's an idea. I spoke to her a couple months later. She was much better, had a smile on her face. I said, what's going on now? I said, you were right. She said she got a job as a guidance counselor in Baltimore County Public Schools. Her husband bought up a bunch of houses and he loves what he's doing. He renovated them and he's renting them out. If there's any repairs to be done, he goes, he makes the repairs himself. He can do plumbing. He's a brilliant guy. He can do everything. And he says he loves what he's doing.
That's
He's not
awesome.
even thinking about looking to go back to work with another company.
So I mean, that's a great story. We kind of got a little sidetracked because I had two other questions to ask you. One was, and I think we talked about this in the previous episode, but why did you choose Chabad over Breslov or Satmar or Yeshivish or any other labeled sect of Orthodox Judaism? You gave me an answer when I was younger. I'm curious to see if that answer has changed or you're
Ooh,
going to say
what
something
did
else.
what did I tell you?
I'll tell it to you after you answer the question.
Okay. I knew immediately that certain groups were not for me. I knew immediately that you're more extreme, Breslov, Satmar, Belzer. I knew that those groups were too extreme for me. I just, especially Satmar. I think those, well, I know some people are going to be very offended, but I think anybody that would be in such an extreme group like the Satmar Hasidim. Okay, you have to. Okay, you know what? If you're a Satmar Hasid and you find it fulfilling, bless you. Please, it's okay. If you find that spiritually fulfilling, if you find that that's your avenue to Yiras Shamayim, wonderful. But I just feel that I think people in those groups are a little on the edge. Not all of them, John. I mean, remember, Rabbi Taub was Satmar, and he was an amazing person. He was an amazing person who attracted Jews from all walks of life to his synagogue, and to go to him for advice. He was a wonderful person who just the world's not filled with too much of these wonderful people. But when you think of like Natura Carta, you think of the stone throwers, the Shabbos stone throwers.
Yeah.
Not for me. No, I'm not an extremist like that. Oh, I did hear an interesting story on Rabbi Gordon's shiurim about that there was a whole group of people from the Natura Carta in the late 1950s. The ones that were throwing stones at the cars on Shabbos, who came to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and they asked him, they wanted him to encourage Chabad to join them. They basically gave him an invitation. They wanted Chabad to join them. The Rebbe's answer to them was, tell me about one Jew that has decided to become Shomer Shabbos because you busted their windshield.
Nice.
And that just totally shut them up. I felt now when I was looking around for different groups, at first I went for modern Orthodox, and I don't know. I felt the modern Orthodox people. It was kind of like it was almost like the right track for me, but not quite. I felt that there were certain groups in Judaism, like the Karlbach group, where there was all this jumping and singing and kamandava and a lot of fun. But then something told me there's got to be more to Judaism than jumping and singing and having fun. Then there were other groups that were very like Mussardik. That was like your more Lithuanian and German groups were more Mussardik. And I just felt that Musser's got its place, believe me, and it can be very constructive. but I just felt there was something that I needed. I needed like more honey than lemon juice, let's say, in my life. And I told you the story about the Boston Rebbe, right?
Yes, we've talked about that.
We talked about that story, right? And what I liked about Chabad was I liked their teaching of Chassidus. I felt that the Hasidic teachings were more up my alley. They had more of appeal to me. I also liked the fact that they weren't cloistered like the other more extreme Hasidic groups. That they believed in being in the public, getting out in the public, and actually trying to. I like their idea of makarving non-from Jews and trying to basically spread, offer education and information. And that's what I told when your brother was considering becoming a shaliach. We were discussing the idea of being a shaliach, and to what point do you push when you're dealing with non-from Jews? And I said to him, look, I said, as Chabadniks, as shaluchim, our job is to offer information and opportunities to those who want it.
Yeah.
And you can offer somebody to come for Shabbos to have the opportunity to experience a real Orthodox Shabbos. You can offer them information that they're looking for, but if they don't, you can offer them the opportunity to put on tefillin. You can offer them a Shabbos candle, but if they say no, all right, that's certainly their choice, and we respect that.
So my question then, I have a few questions and a comment. One of them was like, as you were talking, I realized, because I thought of this myself, why I daven, at Chabad and whatnot. I don't want to be the most religious person in the room. You know what I mean? Like that's why for me, I used to daven at a modern Orthodox shul. It was near one of the places I worked, and I knew more than the rabbi.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I didn't feel comfortable, at a place like that. I wanted to be ignorant. I like feeling ignorant because at least it feels like I'm growing and I'm learning. So that's why I like being around people that are more religious than me and hold by more stricter things. I wouldn't do it just because it's not my preference. I have my own opinions about it and whatnot, but I personally not just don't mind it. I really enjoy being around people that are more religious than me.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing I wanted to notice that, as you were talking, I was going to ask you then, how would you define Jewish suffering then?
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
Let's put it this way. I think we Jews have suffered enough, and I think this is what the Rebbe was trying to do during his lifetime. We Jews have been through so much, in our history, that when the Rebbe became Rebbe, it was right after the Holocaust, and it was a time when Jews just felt the whole brunt of.
No one cares then. No one cares now.
They felt the whole brunt. They felt the whole brunt of the negativism at the time. I mean, the saying years ago, and the saying, in fact, when I remember hearing my mother saying this all the time too. You probably have heard stories about people who grew up in 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, saying that they heard this all the time from their parents and grandparents. Schwer zu sein a Yid, schwer zu sein a Yid, schwer zu sein a Yid. And what the Rebbe's job was to do, he had a big job of basically uplifting the entire Jewish psyche to a happy, positive level and showing them, isn't it schwer zu sein a Yid? It's good to be a Yid.
Yeah.
It's good to sein a Yid. And if you look in the Tanya, it means it's very close to you to do the Torah in your heart and your mind and your actions.
Yeah. For listeners,
and it is, people don't realize that. People look at Judaism like, oh my God, it's so hard. So it's not it really is not. I mean, what you need to eat the pork, which by the way is very high in carcinogens. You know, you need to eat the tray stuff. You need to eat the shellfish again, very high in carcinogens and all sorts of bacteria. I mean, you know, to the basic laws of kashrus are pretty easy to pretty easy to follow. Oh, what was it? Oh, I have to tell you something. A story that occurred to me. I
Yeah.
just thought of it the other day. That happened to your father. We got a Shabbos guest once. This was a young man. His father was Jewish. His mother was not. He was dating a Jewish girl very seriously. He wanted to marry her, and he found out. I don't know how he found this out. If he contacted Chabad or something, but he found out that the halacha was that he technically was not Jewish, even though he was one of these people who was raised thinking he was Jewish. There are
Yeah.
many people like this because his father was Jewish. They went to, I guess, a Reform, conservative temple, whatever. And he found out that really, technically, he was not Jewish. So he thought he wanted to do things right. And he decided he's going to look into the idea of conversion because, if he thinks he's Jewish, he doesn't want to just go around thinking he's Jewish and finding out technically he's not. So if he feels he's Jewish, he is Jewish, he's going to take it all 9 yards. But something was stopping him. And so he decided to go to a Frum family for Shabbos and really get involved and see what Frumkeit was. Well, that Shabbos, your father had a friend over. I'm not going to mention his name, but you know.
Oh, I know who.
Yeah. And your father and this friend, for some reason at the Shabbos table, got into a very silly, regressive adolescent mood.
Yep.
I don't know why or where it came from. And they started telling all these very embarrassing X-rated jokes. And I'm telling them, cut it out, and there is something about them they couldn't stop. And they're just going on and on and on. I'm going, oh no. And here we have this guest here who is here to see what a real Frum Shabbos is. And here's this man in a kapata with a beard, yarmulke, and he and his friend are telling these off-color jokes. I'm going, no. Well, after Shabbos was over, the young man calls me back. And the minute I hear his voice, I said, I want to apologize for you. I'm so sorry. I said, I know you came to see a real Frum Shabbos, and I'm sorry. I don't know what got into my husband. He and his friend were just in this crazy mood. And the guy says to me, oh, please don't apologize. Please don't apologize. Because of what your husband and his friend did, I decided I want to convert. I said, really? He says, yes. He says, let me tell you something. He says, what was stopping me from converting was I thought in order to be an Orthodox Jew, I would have to be like a tzaddik, like an angel. Like I couldn't even be a total, flesh and blood human being. But when I saw your husband, this kapata long beard, and his friend telling all these filthy jokes, he said, it made me realize I can be a human being and I can be Frum too.
That's awesome. By the way, the answer when I asked you why you were Chabad, you said Chabad is like the Marines, and that you like it when you like it. Chabad is tough and strong, and they were like the army of Hashem. Therefore, you choose like Marines. So that's why you chose Chabad. And that was the answer you gave me when I was like, I think 16, 17.
Yeah, I always felt that way about Chabad. I thought other groups look for Haturim. I call them sissy Haturim.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, we want to do the whole 9 yards, so we'll look for a little way around it. That's what I liked about Chabad is they take on Judaism all 9 yards. They take it on 100%, and they don't look for an easy way out. I mean, it's not that you should suffer, but it's not really suffering. It's I guess I want to say, I'm for lack of a better term, making you tough.
Again, that's what I said at the beginning. That's what I said at the beginning. You went full denial on that.
But that's suffering. You know what I mean?
But it's not.
It's not really suffering. It's like the person who exercises to build up his muscles. No, like they say, no pain, no gain. But there are different pains. There's one pain, like I've taken exercise class, and they always tell us there's a good pain and a bad pain. The good pain is you're working and you're working and you're feeling yourself getting stronger, but you're putting in the work. The bad pain is when you feel, God forbid, like something sharp and painful. Now that's not good in exercise. That means that you've done something wrong.
So I feel that same way when it comes to Judaism. I mean, I'm not breaking halacha. I'm not going against the Torah. I'm not doing any of that. But for me, because I grew up in Orthodox home with Baalei Tshuva parents, and then I went to Israel, and then I got my smicha in Israel, and then I started learning more and more about halacha and what is the right thing to do and all the right machshavas and things like that. I started realizing that the way I grew up and the way I was raised and the way I learned, there were a few things that were a little bit, off, and they had to be corrected.
Well, I agree with you on that. Yeah.
And
I find that too. Yes.
So because of that, I kind of developed a different taste of Judaism that would be different from anyone else in my family. Like I can appreciate a Chabad outlook in life. I very much believe in the Chabad way of life, but the halachas of Chabad and the stringencies of Chabad, I don't necessarily do.
Well, you said something one time, which is true, is that the problem with Baalei Tshuva is because we've never, we didn't see, really Shomer Tomer and yet Shomer Tomer mitzvahs, Judaism practiced as we were growing up in our own immediate families and our own immediate environment. So we go along with those people who makarved us because we don't know what else to do. And so a lot of the stringencies, which I found also myself, there were some stringencies that I found also myself years later that were not necessary, and that I was following because, like I said, the people who makarved me were following those stringencies, and that was like their personal stringencies that I didn't realize at the time. I thought this was supposed to be for everybody, and no, it wasn't. I'll give you an example. I remember one of the things that the family I spent Shabbos with, whatever, at first, they told us that on Shabbos you're not supposed to brush your teeth because you could cause your gums to bleed, and also you're scraping, all sorts of things. And then when I was in Crown Heights, I was learning halacha. There was one of the halacha teachers heard that many of the girls were being told not to brush their teeth on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and he was surprised. He says, "I was surprised about this." He goes, he was a rabbi. He says, "I brush my teeth on Shabbos and Yom Tov. What's going on here? What are these girls being taught?" And then I finally spoke to our dentist about it, and our dentist, who also was about tshuva, he got to the point where he actually went for a Pesach din to a couple of poseks about this, because he said the Orthodox Jewish kids were coming with mouths full of cavities after every Yom Tov. He says, "What is the real halacha?" And then he got back to me and he said to me, the real halacha is is that you don't, brush your teeth very vigorously, purposely causing them to bleed. You can brush them lightly, and you can even floss very lightly. Don't tear floss, but use one of those floss picks, those ones that are already, torn for you. There's little pick things. And he says there's a halacha against smearing, which is the toothpaste, but you can brush your teeth with mouthwash. You can floss, you can brush with mouthwash. And so then I started, doing that after I heard about this.
So it's funny because I actually had a whole discussion with my friends. We had this like small kiddush club at shul, and at the kiddush club, I go ahead and I ask a random halacha question or minha question because I'm just curious, because I like thinking of well, this is what I know. What do other people think? And I asked them about brushing teeth. What's the deal? And what it is that you're not allowed to smooth something on Shabbos. That's why putting lotion on your hands is usher. That's why, with shoes and shoe polish on Shabbos is usher, because you are basically, smoothing. So you can't use a hard bristled brush. It needs to be a soft bristled, or sometimes they have these Shabbos brushes where they're it's plastic. It's plastic bristles. And what you do is you take watered down toothpaste or mouthwash, and that's what you do. And as long as you're like, you have to just avoid with your gut. You can't bleed on Shabbos. You can't make yourself bleed on Shabbos. So when it comes to flossing, you can't necessarily floss, at least from what I've learned, because when you're flossing, you're forcing a situation where you have a higher probability of bleeding, and it's best not to. So I don't floss on Shabbos, but I brush my teeth with a Shabbos toothbrush, and that's really what it is where it's just like, there's also being more stringent, is something where it's like for me, it's like I grew up in a stringent household. As I got older, I took a very lenient approach to Judaism, but at one point I took such a lenient approach, I didn't even feel the sanctity of the mitzvah or the sanctity of the moment, and I felt like I had to like go back to a more stringent approach just so I can feel the Judaism. And I think for me, at least, the way I understand it is that it's more about feeling Judaism to a point. I'm not saying, a lot of these like, I don't call them rabbis, whatever, these people who believe like, oh, you don't have to keep Shabbos and kashrus to feel Jewish. Like, that's not really the point. The point is you're supposed to follow Torah and mitzvos no matter who you are. That's why you have all kinds of Jews that keep Torah and mitzvos, and they're all together as one because we all keep Torah and mitzvos. Like, that's the point. But whatever, I can go on, we can go on a whole long.
I remember when your father and I, first got married, first few years of our marriage, there was like the controversy, as usual is in all Jewish communities, and it was you had your conservative and reform, groups that were, their idea was that they were trying to attract Jews to Judaism by basically watering it down and not doing the mitzvahs. But they thought if they would not do the mitzvahs, then that would attract them or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like for an appeal.
So I told your father, I am tempted to write a letter into the Jewish Times. And when I told your father about this letter, he cracked up laughing. He goes, "You write it, I'll sign it." The letter that I wanted to write, I never did, but the letter I wanted to write was, during the Vietnam War, there was a saying that fighting a war for peace is like blankety blank blank for virginity. Yeah. The same thing can be applied to any group that gets rid of the mitzvahs to try to attract Jews to Judaism.
Yeah, it's silly. It's really, really silly. And that's where I find it so like, I find it's frustrating to me, but I learned to not let it get to me all the way. But for the sake of a podcast, I think amping things up and making things dramatic, I think is great for listeners. But it's silly. It's really pointless and really silly. But adding to what I was saying, with being Shomer Torah mitzvos, within that world of Shomer Torah mitzvos, that's where the flavor comes in, where it's like how much stringency, how much leniency on what things exactly do you hold by, and you do that throughout a lifetime. Honestly, throughout a lifetime, you do that to go ahead and find yourself and define yourself in Judaism and figure out ways to do that, because these Torah mitzvahs are there to serve God, which is what we're supposed to do in the first place. So,
but this is the purpose of a Rav. This is why you go to a Rav.
Correct.
For shilas, because they're supposed to be the experts, and even the Rav that you pick, a Rav is supposed to consider all ramifications before posketing a shaila, and that includes where you are spiritually, that includes your environment, and he takes all this into consideration.
Yeah, I mean that's why you're supposed to have a mashpia as well, like somebody that's supposed to be there looking out for you outside of your wife and your friends, that you could lean on, and then you speak to a Rav to really poskin something, but you should be knowledgeable enough to obtain like a lower tier level of rabbinical ordination. I mean, that's what I like about Chabad, is how they explain, how it's explained to me, is that like in Chabad, you go through the regular like yeshiva world, and when you're finishing up, at 18, your last part of, like, I'm trying to find the right words for it, but whatever, the last part of the lower tier yeshiva, you then do a 2-year program of smicha, and you should have
the base measures, you mean?
Yeah, base measures, but it's I think they call it Zal, I think, or something like that. They finish Zal and they start 2 years of smicha, and after smicha, and then you have your mashpia, then it starts getting to this situation where it's like worst case scenario, then you call a Rav. Like, you don't consult a Rav right away, because there are a lot of people. I remember speaking to somebody and they were telling me how, at the end, like at the end of the day, you really need to go ahead and consult a Rav, but they wouldn't even wait till the end of the day. They would do right away, instead of consulting maybe a safer and figuring it out yourself and understanding it. They were so scared and had such little knowledge. They had to constantly be calling Rabbanim for like the simplest things. And it's wasteful time on so many levels.
The Lubavitcher Rebbe, I remember when I was in New York in the 70s, spoke about that. And he preferred that when people were in doubt, that they do go to a Rav. And he said there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, what concerned him at the time was that you had a lot of people who, I hate to say, but felt the way what you just said, that they would consult a book first, they would think about it, then they would try. You had a lot of people that were avoiding calling the Rebbeim, and the Rebbe said this was not good. He said there's nothing wrong in consulting the Rebbeim as often as you feel you need to do. He says this is what they did. This is their job. This is what they're supposed to do.
But he also said it is important for men to get their smicha, so they don't have to constantly consult a Rav. I literally just read this like a month ago, where it was like the Rebbe strictly said to get smicha because they didn't want to have this constant questioning thing. You should have a knowledge. You should have a background. You should know what's going on.
But there's also you also need a background to be able to know how to ask your shayla to begin with.
Again, that's back to the smicha thing. If I have smicha, I know what kind of question to ask. Like, I got consulted where I had to. I normally ask a friend of mine who's more knowledgeable in things than I am. I ask him, and if he doesn't know, then I ask like a guy above him. And I had this one shayla last week about like the certain situations on Shabbos, and I had a shayla about Shabbos, and like I was able to speak and discuss and say the points that were necessary in order for the Rav to understand what I'm saying, so he can give me the right answer. Because what happens a lot of times is that you'll have somebody not know how to talk to a rabbi, say a bunch of unnecessary extra information. The rabbi starts getting confused, being like, wait, what is he saying? And then they get into this whole long spiral, and the rabbi hopefully will give the right answer, but sometimes will give like an answer that other people will be like, I don't understand. And then it's just like, well, yeah, because the guy who was asking the question didn't really understand what was going on in the first place and didn't know how to ask.
Exactly.
You really have to know how to ask a question. That's the other point.
I remember one time that there was this in the dormitory, we were doing like these skits for Saturday Night Entertainment. So one of the girls does the skit where she pretends she's calling. It was Rabbi Azdaba is one of the big. I think he still is. I think he's still around.
Yeah, I think he's still alive.
Big Pusky in Crown Heights. So she pretends she's on the phone with him, and she says, "So Rabbi Azdaba, listen. After I had some miso soup, I had some," and she goes into all these technical, like quinoa and all these at the time, like macrobiotic, herbs and everything. And then she says, what should I, so she said, so what should I, what bracha should I make? What bracha achrona should I make? And then there's pause and she goes, what do you mean you don't know?
It's cute. Yeah, so I guess what it really boils down to is you have to know what you're doing. And if you don't know, that's okay. But you have to ask somebody else. That's why it's important to have a mashpia. It's important to have someone, that's knowledgeable in everything, or not everything, but knowledgeable enough to help guide you, that knows more than you, that can help you understand what's going on. And it's very frustrating because like we're about to end, but like you really got to be careful with who you talk to, what you do, and all of that as well. All right.